As you might have heard, an old beta version of Pokemon Gold and Silver that contained lots of mysteries and even more unanswered questions was leaked to the public a while ago. It's just as well that this channel is all about this sort of turbo nerd crap, because that gives me an excuse to squeeze this big fat milk tank for all it's worth. This is supposedly the same demo that was available at 1997's Nintendo Spaceworld. Apparently they didn't let the visitors take photos, and until now practically everything the fanbase knew about these mysterious old versions comes from promotional material, magazine scans, and a report of someone who was present at the event. But before I go any further, allow me to just put up a disclaimer. I do not have the technical knowledge to CSI the ROM and figure out whether it's real or just a very elaborate prank. In case this video ends up going Chernobyl on my ass, this disclaimer still won't excuse me being a moron, but it will at least explain why I was being one. Having said that, however, I am more than willing to believe that this is the real thing despite a few inconsistencies, such as the demo referring to Silent Hill instead of Silent Hills like the promotional material does. All of the music in the demo is also recycled from Generation 1, which is strange since the game was supposed to be 80% complete according to the cutting room floor. Still, I have 3 reasons to believe it's the real deal. The first reason is that the content in this demo matches the previously known info. There certainly wasn't that much in the first place, but the towns, the Pokemon, and a few details such as the minigames mostly fits what little we knew. It also has to be noted that a lot of that info was based on an account and interpretation of what someone saw at the Spaceworld event, and it wouldn't be surprising if some of the details were misremembered. The second reason is that the people involved in this, namely the Cutting Room Floor team, are trustworthy individuals with experience in the technical department and know way more about CSI in games than I ever will, and if this all turned out to be fake, their reputation would become an even bigger joke than Electronic Arts' public relations. The third reason is that creating all the stuff packed into this demo would require an enormous amount of work, too much just to play a prank on the internet. Maybe not the most effective argument in a world where Hello Games exists, but still keep in mind that this thing has new overworld graphics, dozens of new Pokemon with their own sprites, names and movesets, an entire region's worth of maps that you're not even supposed to see, and several fully working minigames. Either way, it's finally time to get into the actual fun parts. Boot this sucker up on your favorite emulator and you're greeted with the usual trademarks and logos, followed by a familiar yet different intro sequence. Some elements were either revamped or changed and it's completely silent. As you've seen already, the title screen is also different. The main menu has 2 options. The second one takes you to the settings menu, which is missing the print menu and menu account settings. The other option starts the demo. Professor Oak welcomes you to the Pokemon world and explains that he needs your child labor in order to create a more complete Pokédex. To get you started, he gives you a Pokemon and some basic items and off you go. You wake up in your room with a random starter Pokemon and a few items, and right off the silhouette we have a few possibly interesting details. A radio transmission mentions that Professor Oak has disappeared from Kanto, with some of his fellow researchers speculating that he's set out to find a new place to continue his research, or that he got caught up in something, likely a child labor case. Maybe Professor Oak was originally going to have a bigger role in the Team Rocket plot. In fact, there's a set of sprites for what seems to be the Imposter Oak character from the trading card game. Or maybe it's just an ambiguous way to say that Professor Oak is visiting the new region, sort of like his appearance in Mr. Pokemon's house. Checking the PC, you learn about Yoroidori, a bird Pokemon described as having wings hard like steel. The name Yoroidori translates to armor bird, and I'm sure you've realized that this refers to Skarmory, which in the final Japanese release is instead called Armed, a combination of air and armed. The steel type was also instead called metal at this point. Interacting with the doll reveals that the player received it from some undefined relative in Kanto. This may or may not have something to do with the fact that it was originally planned for the protagonist to hear rumors that a certain young boy in Kanto completed the Pokédex. For a final curveball, you can check the TV, which directly references the anime, much to the disdain of some people, I'm sure. More specifically, it references a scene from episode 25 in which Ash runs away from a Primeape. Once you leave the house, feel free to spend a moment adjusting to this vomitous abortion of a color palette. The complete versions of Gold and Silver were intended to be played on the Game Boy Color, but they were still compatible with the older systems. This demo, however, was from back when they were still targeting the monochrome Game Boys, but at the same time it was one of the special snowflakes that had special compatibility with the Super Game Boy, an add-on for the Super Nintendo that plays Game Boy titles in color. I'm pretty sure I've got my emulator configured correctly, so I have to ask what was Game Freak smoking when they decided to make everything puke green. If the intention is to make me want to wash my eyes with a cactus, then congratulations, it's super effective. There are alternate palettes, but I'll get to that in a bit. Once you're ready to melt your eyes in this long-lasting 5-minute journey, you're free to explore the town or head left to see some action. Here in Silent Hill you have a closed building, a Pokémon Center that's currently under repairs, and a proverbial middle finger blocking your path. The only thing of note here is the Rifle's house, something that never shows up in the final games. To the left you have Route 1. In here you have wild grass and a few trainers to fight, which is the meat of this demo. The battle screen didn't really change much between Generation 1 and 2, but not all of the small additions are here yet. The experience bar has been implemented, but not animated. Genders already existed, as you can see from the status screen, but they aren't displayed during battle yet. And speaking of status screen, the layout is nearly identical to the one in the Japanese release, just lacking the colors and having a few minor differences. In case you're not aware, the English release remodeled the status screen, most likely for space reasons, so that's the odd one out, not this demo. Moves do have new animations though, and many Generation 1 Pokémon have already received new sprites. There seems to have been an effort to try and portray the entire Pokémon in their back sprites whenever possible, and some of them are mirror versions of their front sprites. Only a few species had full body back sprites in the end, and it wouldn't be until Generation 5 that every Pokémon received one. The two new types, Dark and Steel, are present but haven't been completely integrated at this point. The move Bite, for example, is still normal type. Magnemite and Magneton can't normally be found in this demo, but if you fuss around with the debug functions, you can discover that they're still mono-electric instead of electric and steel. Curiously, both types of battles use the Kanto Gym Leader theme as their background music. The inventory opens a full screen menu, listing medicine, balls, and held items in a single list. Through the debug functions, you can start with a bunch more items, including separate bags for balls, TMs, and key items. Rather than cycling left or right, you instead open them from the primary inventory menu. The ball bag is empty even though the debug inventory items include Pokeballs and Ultra Balls, so maybe this wasn't actually finished yet. I've also noticed that wild Pokémon have a tendency to eat a berry, escape, or both, which is something that only a select few can do in the final release. I don't think I need to explain how much this grinds my gears, considering that the Pokémon Center's functions aren't available due to repairs, and also considering that the 10 potions you start with are your only source of healing. Thankfully, this demo is shorter than my attention span, so it shouldn't be too much of a problem regardless. It ends when you reach the Rifle, who is waiting in front of a gate, seemingly just to tell you that you suck and that you should go home and suck on some rare candy. He seems to be closer to Generation 1's Rifle in terms of personality, being more of an arrogant prick rather than an angsty prick. After this, the game unceremoniously resets, but buckle up because we're not done yet. Pressing select on the title screen opens up a debug menu, in which you'll find all sorts of things that are as interesting as they are irrelevant because they ended up being scrapped. The first option is Fight, which opens up a battle test. You pick your own Pokemon and then you pick either a trainer or a wild Pokemon. Unfortunately, trainer battles seem to be bugged, but you can at least check out a few cut classes, such as Soldier. The second option is called Field, but let's leave that aside for now. The third option, Sound, lists the music in the game, but doesn't seem to play it or allow it to actually do anything. The fourth option is Subgame, and allows you to play one of 5 minigames. The first one is Poker. You get 5 random cards, select which ones you want to keep, then swap the others with new random cards. You win or lose depending on what matching cards you end up with. Next is 15 Puzzle, a simple sliding tile game with 15 pieces. I'm almost glad that it was removed, because frankly this sort of puzzle makes me feel incredibly stupid. Following that comes a matching game, which is a matching game. The fourth minigame is Picross, also known as Nonogram. If you're not familiar with it, it's a grid-based puzzle where you need to mark the correct tiles in order to form an image. The numbers indicate how many correct tiles there are on each line, and using those as a guide you have your brain do its thing. It's a pretty fun puzzle game, and it's a shame that it was scrapped. There was going to be a standalone Pokemon Picross game from the Game Boy Color in 1999, but it was cancelled. However, a Pokemon Picross game was eventually released for the 3DS in 2015. Finally, there's Slot, which is just the slot machine that ended up in the final game. There's one more minigame, which is triggered by letting the intro and title screen cycle twice. You control Pikachu and must catch as many notes as you can before reaching Jigglypuff. Doing so changes the title screen. The next debug function is Monster, which displays every Pokemon's front and back sprites. This is one of the most interesting parts of this whole thingy, because it gives you a glimpse of what could have been, and believe me, there is a lot that could have been. A good portion of what I'm about to say is merely speculation, so take it with a grain of salt. I don't have the patience to go through every little detail, but neither do you, so it all balances out. Instead, I'm just going to bring up what I personally think is most noteworthy, starting with the 2 legendary parrots. Ho-Oh has a different front sprite, but otherwise looks as fabulous as ever. Lugia, however, isn't present. This is because Ho-Oh was originally meant to be the cover legendary for both versions, while Lugia was only later created for the second Pokemon movie, The Power of One. One can speculate that Lugia was added after the game got reworked into what we eventually got. The legendary trio was redesigned, and thank God for that. Raikou still needed another game before its face stopped looking stupid, but hey, still better than Mr. Blood Edge over here. Chikorita and Meganium remain nearly identical aside from their name, but Bayleaf is this. While initially I found it weird that it would go from quadruped to sprout thing to bigger quadruped, after letting my 5 remaining brain cells do their thing, I thought to myself that maybe all 3 of them had completely different designs at some point, and Bayleaf's redesign just wasn't done yet. Meanwhile, the Cyndaquil and Totodile families are nowhere to be seen. Honoguma and Kurusu instead take their places as the fire and water starters respectively. These two were some of the few scrapped Pokemon that were previously known, but not their evolutions. I'm not gonna lie, I'm more than happy with Cyndaquil and Totodile, but these starters are pretty rad too. Several new Pokemon in this demo are evolutions of Generation 1 Pokemon. Some were kept mostly intact, some got reworked, and the rest remain missing to this day. In Pokédex entry 251, we have not Celebi but Leafy, which evolves from Eevee by using a Leaf Stone. It resembles Leafeon, and in fact their Japanese names are nearly identical, so I think it's more than a bit safe to assume that this is an early version of it. Since the Leaf Stone was the only elemental stone that didn't evolve Eevee, maybe Leafeon was even planned all the way back in Generation 1, but who knows. Espeon and Umbreon got a small revamp in their designs, but their evolution methods were completely changed. In the final games, Eevee evolves into one of the two once its happiness is high enough. If Eevee evolves during the day, you get Espeon, but if it happens at night, you get Umbreon. In this demo, Eevee evolves through the Heart and Poison Stones, items that were never implemented in the end. Umbreon is also Poison type instead of Dark. Porygon 2 had a heavy reworking. Perhaps, maybe, possibly, you have noticed that it resembles Pon de Lion, a mascot of Mr. Donut, an international fast food chain that was founded in 1956. Given the similarities, I initially assumed that Porygon 2 was redesigned in order to avoid legal issues. But here's the thing. Pon de Lion's first appearance was in 2003. The only vaguely believable explanation for this, aside from being a ridiculous coincidence, involves Yuichi Ito, an animator who has worked on a variety of promotional videos and commercials. He was a freelancer from 1994 to 1998, and during that time he worked on the Bazar de Gozaru project, a marketing campaign by NEC. Part of this campaign was a video game for the PC Engine, developed by none other than Game Freak. Maybe this old Porygon 2 was some doodle that Ito sketched up for Game Freak while he worked on the Bazaar Games commercials, but since it ended up not getting used in the complete release of Pokemon Gold and Silver, he went and recycled it for Pon de Lion. But again, this is just speculation and there could be a different explanation for this. Maybe he just saw this Porygon 2 on Game Freak's offices and Pon de Lion was simply inspired by it. Or maybe it's really just a coincidence, but that's a boring explanation, so screw it. Pinsir and Whippinbell still haven't received a new regular evolution to this day, which I find somewhat unfair considering that their version counterparts kept theirs. Pinsir did get a Mega Evolution though, so I guess that counts for something. There's also this jerk stain of a Pokemon here. Yes, that's the Shelder that's munching on Swobrow's tail and is eating Mega Swobrow alive. This thing may have been forgotten, but Swobrow doesn't. Just look at its face, he knows he's done for if you don't cancel that Mega Evolution. Ditto also had an evolution, which is weird considering that its whole shtick is transforming into other Pokemon. There are a bunch of scrapped Pokemon that were baby stages of existing Generation 1 Pokemon. Not surprising considering that Generation 2 was the one that introduced baby making. Vulpix, Meowth, Goldeen, even Grimer had one, and that thing is just a pile of sludge. The last option on the title screen debug menu is called Name, but contrary to that, it opens a prototype Pokegear. It features a world map, a radio, and an unusable phone. The world map is static, so you can't check area names or anything. The radio lets you play a few different tracks. Interestingly, there is a remixed version of the Kanto Trainer theme in here. The phone tab simply says that it's out of range. Now let's go back to the debug menu and finally pick the field option. This starts you at the same place, but now you have a whole bunch of new debug functions, a complete Pokédex, and some extra things in your inventory, which I've already covered. I'm sure you're dying to know what the Pokédex says about the new Pokémon, and I'm sure you'll be even more disappointed to learn that they all have a generic entry simply saying that it was just discovered and is currently under research. In this field mode, you can walk through solid objects by holding the B button, allowing you to raise your own middle finger against that stupid rock. You are now free to explore this vast world. Sort of. This shouldn't come as a surprise, but there are no events or anything to interact with, and many zones lack collision data. Aside from 2 NPCs inside the gatehouse at the end of the demo, who say nothing interesting, the rest of the world is entirely static. All you can do is walk around and fight the wild Pokemon in the various grass patches. But hey, you can at least look at the scenery. Past the gatehouse is Old City, which should be familiar if you've previously done some research into this old version of Gold and Silver. Its most notable feature is this tower, and is speculated to have been reworked into either Violet or Ecruteak City. The former has the Sprout Tower as its landmark, while the latter's aesthetics more closely resemble Old City along with having its own towers. Well, 1.5 towers. Recognize this place? Indeed, it's Pallet Town, but there's more. Through the warp function, you can check that this area is called Kanto, and that's because the surrounding area seems to be some sort of miniature squished up version of Kanto. And speaking of miniature squished up versions, it seems that Game Freak planned for the world to be some sort of fictional equivalent of Japan itself. The name Kanto is also the name of one of Japan's real-life regions, and if you were to compare the layout of the demo's world with the layout of Japan, you might notice that they kind of resemble each other. The good boys over at the cutting room floor have a really nice breakdown of this whole thing, so you should check it out. They also mention some similarities between Scrapped Cities and Canawave and Snowpoint Cities from Sinnoh. New type sport splitting the city is certainly very reminiscent of Canawave, which features this layout as one of its defining features. There are scrapped Pokemon that were later reworked into Generation 4, and you could make a case for Sinnoh bringing back lost Generation 2 content, but Game Freak probably does the same for every generation anyway. I have to say though that I don't see the similarities between Canawave's theme and the GSC credits music, but maybe that's just me. I also don't see the resemblance between these two maps and Snowpoint, because there aren't any clear defining traits shared between them like the split in New Type and Canawave. Back to the field debug menu, you have a whole 3 pages of, well, debug functions. Some of them aren't particularly interesting to us as players, so I won't cover them. The vehicle function gives you 4 options. You can walk normally, you can ride a bicycle, you can ride Lapras, and you can be the most radical extreme guy around. The skateboard was in fact mentioned in some pre-release material. The old official site from back when these games were still called Pokemon 2 mentions that the protagonist could use a skateboard in addition to the bicycle, but I don't think there was any footage of it until now. It's kind of broken and you have to hold the B button to stop it from spazzing out, but hey, it's nice to see it be an actual thing that existed at some point. Next is the tool gear menu, allowing you to mess around with time. You can activate a display that shows the current time all the time. Honestly, I don't understand why this wasn't an option in the final game. It would be better than making you open the Pokegear every time. This is also where the alternate palettes I mentioned half a century ago come into play. Actually, calling them alternate palettes is kind of dumb in retrospective, because they're just the palettes used for different times of the day. Curiously, at nighttime your view is highly limited. Maybe Flash was going to play a big role during the night. Thank God they scrapped that idea, because Flash is stupid, and dumb, and stupid. But guess what? There's even more. Some anonymous gentleman modified the ROM to make it load the start of the game, story and everything. I know that hearing my voice for half an hour is like cleaning your ears with acid, but the suffering will end in a couple of minutes, so bear with me for now. The game starts with Professor Oak welcoming you to the Pokemon world and explaining that creatures called Pokemon exist in it and all that. You also get to name the player character and the rifle, along with setting the time and day of the week. After getting turned into a midget, you might notice this guy over here. His name is Ken, and he notes that the player has finally bought his own trainer gear, and that although it only has a clock function right now, it can be upgraded to display a map. No points for guessing that this is just the Pokegear's old name. Ken also mentions that your mother went out for an errand and also tells you to check your computer since you received an email. It's never directly mentioned, but I'm speculating that this guy is the player's brother mentioned in old pre-release material. The email comes from Professor Oak, who has something he must give you, so get ready to go outside. Unfortunately, your childhood friend and rival shows up, claiming he has something to brag to you about, like the stuck-up little runt he is. This turns out to be the same email you received, about how Professor Oak has something for you. Somewhat miffed that he isn't quite the special snowflake he thinks he is, next he asks you what you call your mother. Now you get to pick your mom's name. This function actually still exists in the final game, but is unused. Once you've picked the name, your rifle then mocks you for referring to your mother with such a childish title. Something tells me that this rifle was going to be absolutely insufferable. Anyway, if you head to the laboratory, you'll find nobody besides the rifle there. The solution is to try the age-old tradition of Pokemon-assisted suicide by walking into grass without a Pokemon. Before that happens though, you get stopped by Blue. Yes, Blue, the Generation 1 rival. It turns out that Red's victory over him on the Pokemon League was kind of an eye-opening experience after getting overly confident about his own skills, and now he helps with his grandfather's research. Once everyone is gathered at the lab, Professor Oak explains the situation. 1 year ago in Kanto, he asked the boy to help him build a Pokemon encyclopedia, aka the Pokédex. His hard work resulted in the discovery of a whopping 150 different Pokemon, but it turns out that there was a whole lot more work to be done as new Pokemon continued to be discovered all over the country. So the professor moved here in hopes of continuing his research, and now he wants your child labor too. And thus, you and your rival receive a Pokédex and a starter Pokemon. If you try to leave the lab, your rival challenges you to a battle. And he has a level 10 Meowth for some reason, which means you're screwed. After getting wrecked, the game resets. From what I've read, there isn't really anything to do even if you do somehow win the battle anyway, so I guess this is where it ends. Kind of an underwhelming conclusion, but it is what it is. And with that, I've covered basically everything that I think is most interesting, at least to me. I mean, it's been weeks, and I'm sure that there are already 50,000 billion other videos on this subject, but being the absolute sucker that I am for Pokemon, I wanted to make my own video on this thingy. In the end, I'm not disappointed or mad that parts of this demo didn't make the cut. Sure, I'd like to see the scrapped Pokemon show up in a new generation, and I'd like to explore this lost region and see what secrets and lore were hidden in it. Playing this demo was like discovering a whole new Pokemon generation, and that's something that I'm always up for, but the end product was so good that, despite some ambitious plans, I doubt that the scrapped Pokemon 2 would have been better. Either way, if you'd like to try this demo yourself, the link is in the description. Last I heard, the team in charge of this project wanted to have a translated release sometime around the end of this month, so if you're waiting for that, it should be coming soon. In the meantime, you can check the cutting room floor articles for a whole bunch of details outside the scope of this video. Who knows what surprises you might find.